Alright, you guys, we're going to make some mozzarella pull-apart herb bread. This is super easy and takes 20 minutes total. This is the list of ingredients you're going to need, and let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is make our bread balls. So you want to grab some cooking spray and spray down your glass pan, or if you have a cake pan or a cookie sheet, that will work as well. Just make sure the pan is big enough for as many dough balls as you're going to make. Then we want to grab our original crescent dough. Make sure it's not the flaky or buttery kind. That will ruin the consistency of the balls. We want to make sure it's the original. And you can use one can, or if you want to make a bunch of these, you can grab another couple cans. I'm just going to lay it out like this. This is the easiest way to do it. Now, if you want to get a little bit more out of this dough, go ahead, grab some flour and a rolling pin and roll out the dough a little bit thinner. And I cut right down the center and then the other way. There's already lines that are perforated there. Then we're going to make 3 lines in one section, 3 lines in the other, and then one down the center of those 2 big halves. You should have 24 squares when you're finished with that part of the process if you're using only one can and you didn't stretch it out. Now we're going to grab onto our mozzarella. Now you can use fresh mozzarella, and I love using fresh, but since this is simple, quick, maybe what you already have in the fridge, we're just going to use some string cheese mozzarella today. You can make them into bigger pieces. I don't like a ton of cheese in mine, so I make mine pretty thin. I use 1 stick to make 12 balls, so I make 11 cuts in them. So for a batch of 24, I only use 2 sticks of mozzarella, but you are more than welcome to make them up to 1 inch long if you like a lot of cheese in your bread. And then from there, we're just gonna go ahead and roll up this dough. I just roll them and throw them right into the pan first because that is just the easiest way of doing it. Once you've got them all rolled together, we're gonna go ahead and squish them. Make sure they're touching, otherwise they're not gonna cook correctly and then it won't really be a pull-apart bread. So make sure all the edges are touching just like that. You can make whatever shape you want, Christmas trees, turkeys, be extra festive, who knows. Now we're gonna grab a bowl and we're gonna take our egg, crack it in there. We're gonna add just a little bit of water for the purposes of this video. I'll use about a tablespoon, but I like to usually eye it depending on the egg. I find that they're always a little bit different. I'm gonna use a fork, you can use a whisk, you can also use your hands if you want. Mix it all up, that way you have a good egg wash. It's not clumpy. Sometimes you'll find that you might get a little bit of what I love to call egg goo in there. Just go ahead and scoop it out. You don't want to be cooking that with the balls that you're making, so I just go ahead and toss it to the side. And then once you're done, you can either paint it on with a brush if you've got one. Some people like to use a spatula. I love baking with my hands, so I'm gonna do it with my hands. Make sure they're nice and clean, obviously, and then we'll throw that in the oven at 375 for 10 to 20 minutes depending on your oven. So now we'll get into our topping. We're gonna take some butter. I took about 2 tablespoons, but if you want a little bit more, feel free to just eyeball that. Put it in a container and then stick it in the microwave to melt it. I'm using rosemary, parsley, and basil, but if you like other herbs, you are more than welcome to experiment. And for those of you who like to measure, we're gonna use about a tablespoon of both. So I'm starting with rosemary. Once the butter is out, it's completely melted. Make sure it's completely melted, that it doesn't have any chunks in it. Once it's completely melted, then we'll go ahead and add all these wonderful herbs in it. Like I said, if you're not a parsley person, don't use it. That's okay. If you are not a basil person, don't use it. That's also fine. Another way to make this recipe, which I have not been doing lately, but it is quite a hit, is to add in some finely grated Parmesan with your herb mix. So if you are a cheese fan, go ahead and grab some Parmesan and go ahead and throw about a tablespoon or 2 into this mix. I'm gonna use a fork and mix it all up. Again, you can use a whisk. You can use a bigger bowl if you want. I like to use a ramekin, it keeps everything kind of together. So I'll let mine thicken a little bit, or you can do it real quick as soon as this comes out of the oven. The more butter you use, the more liquid you'll have. So if you want really liquidy topping, go ahead and use that. Now if you find you use too much butter, you put it on here and you spread it all out, and you don't want your bread to be soggy, you can use a little napkin to kind of soak up the butter. So if you find you put a little bit too much on your bread, just grab a little napkin and dab at the top of your bread and it'll be fine. It'll soak it right up. Another little thing trick or so before you plate it. So if I dump a lot of butter on there, because sometimes I like a lot of butter, you guys, and I'll just pull it out like this. Maybe not so pretty. This one's not so pretty this time because I used kind of a small pan. And I'll just put it on another plate so that way all the juice drains into the bottom of that glass pan and doesn't sit at the bottom of my bread. Also for the butter, if you're not a salty flavor person, use unsalted. And if you really like salty flavors, then go ahead and use salted butter. It really doesn't matter. The recipe is great with both. I find that I like the unsalted better, but it's delicious. Again, this takes 20 minutes and that's it. That's our bread.